My name's Dr. Paul Quinn. I'm from Newcastle University School of Engineering, and I've been working in the area of catchment management for about 25 years now, and I'm still struggling with it. And natural flood management came up as a term about 10 years ago. We used to just call it runoff management in the past. And hopefully I'll give the first talk, but I'll be joined by Dr. Alex Nicholson, who's from the Arup Water Group. I've known Alex for a very long time. He did his PhD at Newcastle and now works for Arup for the last 5 years. And Alex knows a lot about natural flood management, so you'll get a lot of detail there. He is committed to bringing natural flood management to industry, and he's also committed to upscaling natural flood management so it actually gets to the kind of scales that will actually save big cities. I'm also joined by Mike Norbury from the Mersey Forest. Are you an NGO? Probably. A charity? Yeah. And Mike's amazing. He's done more NFM schemes than most people I know, and he doesn't seem to realize how difficult NFM schemes are. He just seems to turn up and say, come on, everybody, let's go build this. And they all say, okay, then. And I think that's a skill we might all learn from. Okay, so I'm going to kick off with the first small talk, and then we'll introduce. So I'm going to put my little timer on here to make sure I don't talk too long. Okay. So let me skip on. So I'm going to use the term catchment systems engineering. Catchments are our unit of assessment. So we have catchments that are delivering large amounts of water to our cities, to our edge of our cities, but we also have catchments within cities. So our unit of assessment is always a catchment, but we're kind of trying to make it more relevant to how we're thinking about sustainable drainage systems and green infrastructure in general. So you probably think that moving from agricultural land to urban is probably the biggest land use change, but there's a lot of trouble brewing. So if we look at how the land looked, say, in 1945, when the government committed to growing all our food forever, we still had a fairly natural landscape, even though we were producing food. But we've done a lot of things to the land, and now basically most of our agricultural land generates as much runoff as urban areas. So it doesn't take much rainfall before we get very, very large amounts of runoff. So we're looking at a situation where not only do we have climate change predicting more and more rainfall, when that rainfall hits the ground, it all runs off quickly and is going to hit our town. So we're staring down the barrel of a very serious situation. So being able to do natural flood management is a big issue. So even in our most natural areas, this is the upper D, this is what the catchments should look like. And even by 1867, during the Great Farming Period, the whole landscape had been greatly modified. And even now, there's huge drainage networks. So we're looking at large amounts of runoff being delivered quickly to our towns. And this is why we're seeing more and more floods. And when we get more and more rain, we're going to be in big trouble. So we've now moved to these terms like nature-based solutions. You might have heard of biomimicry or bioengineering. So the term that we're going to concentrate on today is natural flood management. So here's a feature. This is called a large woody debris. This is an engineered structure. We've built this. It looks natural. Does it look natural? Okay, these are all sycamores. For some reason, people don't like sycamores, so we chop them down and put them in. So this just slows down the flow, throws the water onto the floodplain. And if we ever identify where we can see runoff occurring, we just put barriers in the way. So this is called a whiskey barrel feature. So we just store as much water as possible without it being too big a structure, so it doesn't become too big a civil engineering structure. So, and it also won an award, which means that the Institute of Civil Engineering are now acknowledge natural flood management as part of the repertoire of skills that we should bring to the table within our catchments. But if you look at, say, a case study in the edge of Newcastle, this is called the Great Park. 3,000 houses are being built on the edge of town. It's all farmland. It's about to become urban area. So the council was very good in forcing them to keep up the idea of building some SUDs. So we've been studying that. So we've actually been able to identify the rural components. That's the rural component, and that's the urban component, to try and make people understand what's happening. And here's a classic design. So these are the new houses being built. These are the SUDs. So we work out the area, gives a design, and we can. So a good engineer built this to exactly that capacity. All right, and the people in the area were very scared that this was going to flood downstream. So we had to get the evidence that it was working properly. So as a flood wave comes through on the river, the SUDs fill up and then empty slowly over time. And we were able to convince the local community that they worked. one of our conclusions was after we put the suds in, there was less runoff from this area after development than when it was agricultural land. So it's actually an opportunity to lower flood risk downstream. So the myth that urban areas always cause flooding, it's a myth. If you put in enough suds, you can lower flood risk downstream. So it becomes part of a catchment solution. But even though we put these big ponds in, they did overtop. So everybody sent each other legal letters and threatening to prosecute each other, as you do. And we said, no, these features are so big. They're not hydraulic structures. They're not like little pipes. These are big features, so they operate in a natural way. So often, they'd be half full just because the groundwater would rise. Okay, so you have to get people used to the idea that even though you might think it's malfunctioning, it's not. These detention ponds work really well, okay? And so we said, well, learn your lessons. What is it about the work that you've done is you've created some storage. So our first message is storage is good. What's the first message? Yes, right. Okay, so why don't we have more? If there is any green space, more storage. So we've tried to persuade them to expand to the maximum capacity, much bigger than these suds, and try and get more capacity there. They haven't done this, but at least we're suggesting that there is a potential to do this. And even you could put some embankments in there and store probably 5 times as much water as there is there already. Okay, so if you take that concept and say, well, why don't we use the river corridor more sensibly, then you can move upstream. Why not have a long river corridor and identify places where we can store lots of water? So we did that as well. But the most important thing, this is outside the red line around the development. And that's the one thing, is how do you ever do your suds if you go out of your red line? We've got to get people used to the idea of actually, if you want to do some suds or some green infrastructure or some flood storage and you want to build something, don't stay within your red line, go beyond your red line. So we suggested a big storage zone upstream. The lesson from this is that when we designed it as natural flood managers, we estimated it would cost about 50k. However, when the civil engineers turned up, a very prominent company that I won't mention, they would do the same work for £1 million. All right, so we need to get this myth dispelled as well. You can do a lot of this work for peanuts, as long as you know what you're doing, okay, and it's legal. So here we are in Newcastle with green space. This is a little location on campus, and we had a tremendous nightmare that we can define all the drainage area. This is the campus here. This is the Lees Moor. And what happens is when we have enormous storms, all the old rivers come back to life, and they deliver huge amounts of water to different locations in our city. So here's campus. £1 million worth of damage was done on campus by what we call the Toon Monsoon, as we call it, or Thunder Thursday. So we need to think about this. But you can see the green space there. So we proposed a scheme where we intercept the flow and take it onto the green space and then optimize how much storage we can do. So we believe that we can store half the flow for a major storm, a 1 in 100 year storm, on the Lees Moor. So we want green space to be blue green space. What do we want green space to be? Blue green space, okay. And then it wouldn't cost very much money to do this. And that's what we're trying to get across to people. And that's just a little image of what it might look like, campus down here. And then when it discharges to another lake. And we're also working in the city centre now, so they've knocked down the Newcastle brewery. Boo, boo. Okay, we've seen brown water coming off this site. We think it's leftover Newcastle brown. But it's all been totally redeveloped, about a £50 million research site here and lots of buildings. And a commitment to putting sustainable drainage systems across the site as an exemplar to other cities, as to say when you are going to refurbish or redevelop the town, that you can actually put vast amounts of storage. There's a lot of storage underneath this area, lots of suds, and we've got a big swale I'll show you in a minute, and to route the water through and off the site. So the idea is that you can actually route where you think the water's going and where you'll be able to store it, even going through buildings, and actually protect the rest of the city downstream. So we've invested £10 million into this thing called the Suds Research Facility, UCRIC, which is very long term, about £10 million, and we've actually got one of our research buildings here called the Urban Sciences Building, and we've built this Suds ensemble, some lysimeters where we're doing all sorts of experiments, and an enormous green infrastructure of a large swale. So we're testing different types of Suds ensemble that you could probably take out of the Syria manual. And this is our swale. And this is what it looks like after it's been built. We're still fixing it, but you can see it naturally gathers some water at the bottom here. So we're going to put a wetland in the bottom there, and we're going to put a series of leaky dams. and we're actually going to test them. So they might look more like this in a few years' time. But bringing that large green infrastructure to the city centre is really what we're trying to demonstrate. If it doesn't work and people hate it, fair enough, we'll go back to other methods. But if we can make large green infrastructure work within cities as corridors, I think that we might be able to save a lot of people a lot of trouble in the future. So here is Science Central. This is the River Tyne. During the 2 monsoon, all the water came down here and flooded the railway station, shut the railway station down, and caused damage across the whole city. So we think that we can take the lesson of the large swale, and we've actually proposed putting a corridor all the way down through the St. James Boulevard and then down to the Tyne. So we next. Okay, can you hit the play? So we actually can run simulations here. So you can see water falling all over the city, but this is the swale that we've proposed, and it takes the water away from the city centre and straight to the Tyne. And we're working together with Northumbrian Water and the City Council, and we're trying to make this a reality. And so we can actually look at the before and after, and all this water that would have been here is now in the Tyne. Okay? So from lessons learned in rural systems through to peri-urban, detention ponds, green infrastructure, I think we're on to the conclusion. It's big, it's green, and it's really useful. Thank you.